So it's moving day, and I can't tell you how excited these worms are to move into their new home. Not. Hello again, and the reason I don't think the worms are terribly excited is because it's 10 degrees in this bin, and I'm not even sure if that's correct because you can see the amount of water that's in the dial of the thermometer. I think that's condensation, and then it froze and the water just got collected there. But anyhow, what I'm going to do is round up some worms from here, from this big bin, and rehome them into the worm tower. There seems to be quite a lot of worms working away just underneath that light covering of leaves, so despite the cold they don't seem to be all that bothered by it. Before I go on as well, I just want to say a very quick thank you to all the new subscribers. I think the 20th was the day when YouTube changed their rules, and there was a bit of a push to get people who were under 1,000 subscribers, which was one of the criteria for the new monetization program, to get them 1,000 and more. And that happened to me. I think I had 900 and a few before, sometime around sort of the end of January. I now got 1,100 something. So thanks to all of the shout outs and recommendations and sharing of the videos, I've got 200 and odd new subscribers, and equally I've subscribed to several hundred new channels which I found through the shout outs and recommendations. Now the flip side of that is I've got a lot more channels to watch and a lot more excellent videos to watch from great creators I hadn't heard of before. So what it means is it's taking me some time to respond to replies, and if you noticed, I always acknowledge comments. I think it's the right thing to do. If people have taken the time to comment on a video, I think I should at least acknowledge it and reply if there's a question. Now, there's a couple of people who have asked questions. Catherine is one of them. I will get round to answering all of the questions this week, hopefully, and I'll get round to acknowledging all of the comments as well. I think PC, I think it was you that said you don't expect a reply or response, but I just think it's the nice thing to do, and it's the right thing to do. After all, everybody does take time out of their day to watch the videos and make a comment, leave a comment, so I like to respond and acknowledge that way. But you'll notice I haven't been for the last couple of weeks. The other thing to say is as well is just I sometimes think I've got lots of time, free time coming up, and then things change and I'm away again. So I almost put the mockers on it myself as soon as I say, oh yeah, I've got a few days, I'll get a video done, I'll get round to all the comments, and then of course it doesn't happen. So, but hopefully this week I will. So okay, with that out of the way, you can see this compost looks really nice. That's about 8 or 10 inches, maybe a bit more down, and it's lovely friable stuff. Most of the worms are up at the top. The worms are all through the bin, as you can see. I like to check for that they're not avoiding any one particular part of the bin. This bin, because it's so big, it gets a 35 litre container full of food scraps emptied into it as and when. So I don't worry about overfeeding this bin, because the worms are able to stay away from any area they don't like, and if the food isn't quite broken down enough for them, they can just eat elsewhere until the bacteria have done their job breaking that down. So with all of that said, what I'm going to do now is round up a small amount of these worms. I don't want too many, and I'm also not going to weigh them out or count them. It'll just be a small amount, and it's because I want to see the worm population increase in the worm tower. I think that would be a fun thing to look at. Like I said, we're now expecting, this is probably the worst time to move the bin actually, or move the worms out of this bin, because we're expecting a cold snap. I think I heard them saying it's something like the coldest end of February we've had in 6 years or something like that. So these are the first guys to volunteer. They're going to be just put in a little tub here. I put some melon in at the bottom to try and coax them out, but it didn't work, so I have to get physical with them. They just don't want to move from their 10-degree tropical paradise. So I'm going to round up, probably take another 2 or 3 handfuls of worms, and we'll get them off into the new worm tower. So that's about all I'm going to take now. There's always a few little stragglers. This is the Dalek bin, and you can see this is full now. I've taken out a lot of the worms from this bin, but you can see there's still quite a few left. So, like I mentioned many times before, I don't really put a lot of effort into sifting this. I let the worms do all the work. So what I'm going to do is what I always do with this type of setup is I'll just put some food in the middle, just below the surface there, and any worms will make their way into the food, and then it's just a matter of removing the food with the worms and rinse and repeat, as they say, until I'm as satisfied as I can be. Most of the worms are gone. Now this is the 35-litre container of food scraps that's going to be fed. There's a lot of it is squash and potato peel, so that'll take some time to break down. Now for the small bins I recommend freezing and thawing, but for the big bins I don't bother. It's take too much work and would take too long, and we don't have the freezer space. So I'm just looking for something soft, something fruity, but there doesn't seem to be anything in here. So it's going to have to be lettuce. So I'll just break off a few leaves of lettuce and bury them. So this stuff now is going to get fed to the big bin. Now you'll see there's leek and scallion in there, and again it's the same principle. The bin is big enough for it not to worry the worms at all. I wouldn't be putting anything like that into any of the smaller bins unless I had frozen and thawed it, or it had been soaking in water for quite a while, because it'll turn the bin too acidic. Oh, there you go, apple. Partially eaten apple. Okay, well that will go in, because the anything like fruit, so apples, banana, melon, particularly melon, is very high in fructose, the fruit sugars, and of course that will give a massive boost to the bacteria to break down, and the worms love it. So having done all that, I'm now just going to cover that layer of food with a thick layer of leaf. There's probably about 5 inches or so of leaves on top of that food. It will do a couple of things. It'll keep the odours down, so less likely to attract vermin, and it'll also give a layer of insulation at the top. When I was digging through that very top layer, it was quite tough to get my hands down. It was kind of like semi-frozen at the top, even though the worms were all there working away. So I'm not sure that 10 degrees is correct, and I think that's probably because the water in the dial is affecting the reading. So you can see the leaves are quite near the top there, so that's pretty good. I'll leave that now for a couple of weeks. Okay, well this is the bit we've been waiting for. So this is the first tray, or the working tray, of what is currently a worm bungalow, but will eventually end up being a worm tower. That's the stuff we prepared 3 weeks ago, I think it is now. So it's just the wet cardboard, leaves, some vermicompost from the old bin added in, just for the bacterial life to give it a boost. And you can see the cardboard is still nice and moist, so I don't really need to wet this down again. It's plenty wet as it is. What I am going to do is add another layer of leaves, and that's just because it's so cold. You can see how thin the walls are of this bin, and it lives outside. I don't have the luxury of a basement, and I think Mrs. Worms has put up with me and my foibles as much as any human can endure, really. So I think moving worms into the house would be the last straw. So a thickish layer of leaves just to give them some insulation, and onto that now I'm going to add the container of worms that we had. If you order yours from a commercial company online or wherever, it'll come with the coconut coir most likely, and there's the melon. What you need to do then is just hydrate the coconut coir, and there'll be something like worm chow or some sort of powdered food which you then add to the coconut coir when you settle the worms in. You'll get the instructions, but obviously I'm starting this from scratch without any of that stuff, so that's why it's leaves and cardboard, and of course melon, because there's nothing says a housewarming like for worms than a couple of pieces of melon. So that's it, really. That's the worms now moved in. There's not a huge amount, like I said. I don't know how many, and I haven't weighed them. But it's a small enough quantity that over the weeks and months we'll be able to see the population grow, if it grows. And there's no cocoons in there either, so we'll be able to start to see cocoons, and we might even catch some cocoons hatching. They're not very lively, and that's because of the cold. All of the worms in the big bin, did have a good look around. They're all healthy. They're moving quite well, but they're not terribly lively. And I think that more than anything is just symptomatic of how cold it is. Like I mentioned, it said 10 degrees in the bin. I'm really not convinced it's 10 degrees. I suspect it's lower, and it's when I was recording this it was 2 degrees outside. Tonight we're expecting it to go down to about -1, -2, and with the wind chill factor it feels even colder. But these guys will be okay. They're tough worms. Some people you'll see when they get their pound of worms or half pound of worms from the commercial supplier, they'll spread them out. I think it's a better idea personally, although there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. I just think it's a better idea personally to dump the worms out in the bedding that they will have come with, and just leave them to it. They'll move from there when they're ready. So I'm just going to leave these guys in a clump. They will already have been quite shocked, because they can sense that's a different environment now. They can also sense it's a lot colder. So I'm just going to leave them in that mound of bedding I took from the big bin, which is familiar to them. So that's them now, pretty much settled. Just a quick word about feeding. This will come up throughout the series, but there's a good reason for breaking food down as small as possible in small worm bins. Now, you know I'm a big fan of freezing and thawing. That's, I think, the quickest way. But if you take a look at this banana peel, it has 6 sides. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there's 6 sides that the bacteria can attack and start breaking it down. When we cut it in 2, we now have 12 sides that the bacteria can attack. If we cut that up again, we now have 18 sides. We cut it again, we have 24. And then we can keep cutting these into smaller and smaller pieces, and you get the idea. What you're doing is you're increasing the surface area for the same amount of food, the same quantity of food, but what you've done is you've massively increased the surface area of that food for the bacteria to start attacking and breaking it down. When I asked Miss Sprinkles, my granddaughter, why we do that, she said it's because worms have very small mouths. And technically, she is actually correct. Living proof that there is a right answer and there is a correct answer. So this is why, yeah, for feeding small bins, it's a very good idea to instead of throwing your food scraps in wholesale, and again they will break down over time, there's no problem with that, but if you want it to break down quickly or more quickly, cut it up as small as you possibly can, so the bacteria have much larger surface area to work on. Now this is the, you remember in the last episode I said I was going to operate a 3-container system for this series. There'll always be one which is being filled, there'll be one which is in the freezer, and there'll be one currently thawing. So this is the one that we thawed. You can see this has got a lot of carrot peeling, a lot of potato peeling, and some squash peeling. This would take forever to break down. Now my hands are completely I've got the camera angle all wrong here, so apologies for that, but you'll see when I've finished. Even with potato peel and carrot peel, I'm squeezing out a huge amount of liquid, which would end up wetting the bin. This is one of the ways in which the bin, although you don't think you've done anything particularly egregious, your bin gets very wet, and this is part of the reason why. You can see the amount of liquid I'm squeezing out of potato peel. This is mostly potato and carrot peel, and all of that will end up in the bedding of the bin, making it very, very wet. Apart from the fact that hard stuff like the carrot peel, potato peel, squash peel, turnip and swede peel takes a very long time to break down in the bins if you don't freeze and thaw it and cut it up very small. So that's the amount of liquid I squeezed out of that, and I could squeeze out more if I went at it for a bit longer, but you can see that's quite a lot just from potato and carrot peel. Now I've left 2 tea bags there, you can see them just under my hands. I'm going to just monitor them throughout the coming year to see how well they compost in the worm bin, because the answer is they don't, but I think it'd be interesting to just watch. And here's another little fun thing I thought I'd do throughout the series, and that is Eggshell watch. Now again, there is absolutely nothing wrong with this, so the people who advise it and the people who've done it, no problem. But you see the eggshell crushed there. This is the recommendation you come across all the time for small worm bins, which is to crush the eggshells and add them into the worm bin. As those eggshells are, they're no good to the worms whatsoever. They will decompose in time, but it'll be quite some time. And I just thought it'd be a bit of fun to watch how long it actually does take, and by the time this little series ends, which I'll probably run it like the small worm bin series, I'll run the worm tower series for a year. It'll be interesting to see at the end of the year exactly how much of these crushed eggshells we still have in the bin. My bet is on all of them, and that's because in that form they do take quite a while to break down. So that means that the reason we're doing it, which is to add calcium into the final product, we're not really doing it in a very efficient way. Now here's ground up eggshells, and my recommendation is this is how we should be adding eggshells to the worm bin, and that's because in this format they do a couple of things. The ground up eggshells they reduce the acidity of the bin. So if your bin is in danger of becoming slightly too acidic for the worm's liking, this will counteract that. That's number one. Number two is it will break down much quicker in the compost, so therefore releasing the trace elements and minerals that we actually want added into the compost. It'll get into the final product much quicker. And perhaps the most important of all is the worms will use that as grit in their gizzard, which helps them to process the food much quicker. So this is really the ideal way to add. And if you can't do this for whatever reason, there's not a problem crushing the eggshells. Crush them up as small as you can. Even between, if you don't have a piston and mortar or a coffee grinder, rub them between two bricks or two pieces of wood, or just crush them against the paving with a piece of 2x4, whatever you can do to break them up as small as you possibly can. But really what you're aiming for is to, when you add eggshells to your worm bin, you want to be adding them as small as you're able to actually make them. And again, don't worry about it if it's not in the ground up form, but it's the ideal way. I crushed those eggshells up quite small actually, so I've realized we might have a problem keeping track of them. So there's another crushed eggshell, but slightly bigger pieces. And again, because of the cold, all I'm going to do now is just top that off with a small layer of leaves, and we're done. Moving day is complete, and the worms are now in occupation in our worm bungalow. So that's it, folks. Next update will be in 2 to 3 weeks time. We'll see how they're getting on. Once again, a very warm welcome to all the new subscribers to the channel. Thank you as always for your subscriptions and your viewing time. I'll be catching up with all of your comments, like I said, and catching up on all your videos. And as always, thank you for watching. Bye for now.